I want to talk about a great American patriot and the real spirit of America. In 1732, George Washington was born, and as we all know, he went on to become the father of our country. But that same year, another important figure in the fight for our independence against Britain was also born. His name was Francis Marion. And while his nickname was hardly as lofty as Washington's, they called him the Swamp Fox, his spirit still epitomizes, along with Washington's, what made America great, what makes America great, and what will keep America great, no matter what forces we have to fight in the future. And if you're one of those people who think that one voice, one individual can't make a difference, well, listen up, because this is for you. Washington was funded by Congress and the states. His armies numbered in the thousands. His supplies included hundreds of cannon and other weapons of war. And while his men did suffer great defeats and often went hungry and cold, technically, they were still paid. Francis Marion's men were a different breed. Francis Marion led a small group of militiamen, never more than 100, usually in the range of a dozen or two. And their common denominators were they were poor, untrained, and had very few resources at their disposal. They brought their own guns. They brought their own gunpowder. They brought their own food, and some of them even brought their own horses. And their swords, for those lucky enough to have swords, were made from the blades of cross-cut saws, the kind they used to cut down trees at home. And one more common denominator: they weren't paid. They received zero money for fighting for our nation's freedoms. Sort of like the brave men and women who tamed the Wild West in their own search for lands and freedom and opportunities. But back to Francis Marion. Francis and his band of untrained, unskilled in the art of war, poor, hungry, unpaid men were still able to inflict massive damages against the British. First, physically, because they would swarm into the British camps in the dead of night, and before the Brits knew what had happened, half of their troops had been killed, half of their hostages released, and then Francis and his men would disappear into the fog and night of the swamplands, never to be seen until their next attack. That was the physical part. But maybe even more importantly, it was the psychological damage that Francis and his men did. The British couldn't find him. The British couldn't capture him. And they certainly couldn't kill him. He was like a ghost, and it drove the British generals nuts. And this isn't to take away from George Washington's greatness, but it is to say that when you have a principle that you believe in, a belief so strong that you will fight no matter what the odds, that it doesn't matter how many you have on your side. You don't need thousands and thousands to help you fight and to win. Francis Marion had only a handful of men, and by the looks of it, the British should have easily defeated and killed him. But he had a belief in something called freedom, and that led him and his men to win against all odds. And that's something that we should keep in mind as we fight Democrats, as we fight globalists, as we fight China, as we fight transgenderism lies, and LGBTQ evils, as we fight the growing collectivism that's taken root and spread throughout our great country. We don't need the majority to win. Here's a true story of Francis Marion and his men simply standing tall for principle to win the day without even having to do anything but stand tall for principle. Francis used to capture British prisoners, British troops, and hold them as prisoners when he stormed into their camps. And he did so he could exchange them later for American prisoners. And one day, a British officer came to Francis Marion's camp to discuss a prisoner exchange. And Francis invited this British officer for a meal. And when they sat down, the officer was surprised to see that the entire meal consisted of nothing but sweet potatoes and water to drink. And he asked Francis Marion, "Is this what you feed your men?" And Francis said, "Yes, though sometimes there isn't enough potatoes even to go around." And the British officer said, "Well, your men must be well paid in order to keep fighting and enduring such hard conditions." And Francis Marion said, "They're not paid at all." And with shock, the officer looked at Francis and said, "Then why do you fight?" And Francis Marion answered simply, "Because, sir, I am in love with liberty." The British officer went back to his own camp that day and resigned his commission from the army. And when his captain asked him why he was resigning, he said, "Because we will never win a war against men who are willing to live off of river water and roots in their fights for liberty." And isn't that how the West was won as well? Western strong, overcoming all odds, all adversity, from hunger to fights from the enemy, all in pursuit of liberty. That right there is the real spirit of America. That's the best of what Americans can be. So long as we stand tall on principle and remember the fight is for freedom, and not just any old freedom, but God-given individual liberties. So long as we remember that and stand tall on that, it doesn't matter how many we have on our side. It doesn't matter how much money, how many resources, how many college degrees we have. It doesn't matter if we're able to boot all the Democrats from office, or bankrupt the mainstream media outlets that hate us, or shut down the social media sites that want to censor us. Those are all good wins. Those are all worthy pursuits. But it doesn't matter to win the ultimate win. All that matters in the end is our resolve and determination and persistence to fight for American exceptionalism, which is to say, God-given individual liberties. And it's that steadfast commitment that will send our enemies fleeing. Patrick Henry, another great American patriot, put it this way: "Give me liberty or give me death." Francis Marion, in essence, said the same. And it's our responsibility to carry on that spirit despite the odds, despite the obstacles, and leave the win and loss column for God to decide. Because when we make the good fight, when we fight the right fight, we have God on our side. And if God be for us, who can stand against us? We should all go home from this amazing event and teach our children to love liberty, the the way George Washington did, the way Patrick Henry did, the way the fine settlers forging the West for freedom did, the way Francis Marion did. And if we can do that, America will be ours. One really can make a difference. One voice, one generation at a time, and one nation under God, America, will stay free forever. Thank you.